Declaration of Independence rests within a frame made of pure titanium that's coated with gold. The glass enclosing it is tempered, laminated, and calibrated to a thickness of 3/8 of an inch in order to block out harmful UV light. And 70 bolts around the frame apply 300 pounds of pressure per linear inch, sealing it in. Inside the frame, parchment made from 1776, sits atop a perforated aluminum platform so that moisture can reach the backside of it in order to keep it supple, and all the while inert argon kept at approximately 40% humidity and 60 degrees Fahrenheit staves off the oxidation process. And most grandiose of all, the case housing the Declaration, along with the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, collectively known as the Charters of Freedom, are lowered beneath the ground every night into a custom-built vault made to withstand a nuclear blast. But despite these advances for preservation and security, the ability to detect problems is growing faster than the capability to solve them. And most importantly, figuring out what to do if a problem arises. And so it is with us, friends. Though our concern reside not with the preservation and security of parchment and ink nearly 2.5 centuries old, but with preserving within the hearts and minds of the people a readiness to re-examine, reimagine, and reinterpret the guarantees of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when they become crooked, narrow, and hell-bent on making America great in the name of me, the people, instead of we, the people. What then shall we do, you might ask? I'd like to suggest scripture, American scripture. On November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln would use only 272 words for delivering his Gettysburg Address. The speech, lasting just 2 minutes long, would enter the lexicon of American scripture as one of the most powerful and concise statements of freedom our nation has ever heard. And drawing upon his unwavering quest for pursuing the true spirit of our nation's founding creed, Lincoln would posit a new vision of America amidst the chaos and rancor of a civil war. So standing thus on the blood-stained fields of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Lincoln would stand up and say, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Lincoln would continue. But in a larger sense, it is for us to be here dedicated to this unfinished work thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. Lincoln's invitation to participate in the nation's unfinished work of equality would indeed usher in a new birth of freedom, rooted in the sentiment that American exceptionalism, thenceforward and forever, shall include those pushed to the very margins of society, the outcasts. And that to truly make and keep America great, this exceptionalism is incumbent upon each and every citizen, patriot of this nation to pursue not only their individual liberties, but also the unalienable rights of others endowed by their Creator, no matter their race, color, national origin, or later to include sex, marital status, age, disability, etc., etc., etc. Or in other words, love your neighbor as yourself. In the hands of Lincoln, the Declaration became a living document, willing and able to inspire faith, hope, and love of country for the common good, whilst confronting conspiracy, secession, insurrection, and a rebellion against the peace and sanctity of the United States government. Friends, are you picking up what I'm putting down here? Ultimately, though, the authority for preserving the Declaration rests not just in the hands of presidents and politicians, but in we, the people, poets, prophets, preachers, and you. Yes, you, ma'am. And you, sir. And you, and you, and you. Which brings me back to where I began, with parchment and ink, what to do, and this Sharpie. There were 56 signers willing to sign their name to the Declaration of Independence, an act of treason, mind you, against the British Crown. And chief among them were Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and the like. The first, however, was John Hancock, with his signature best remembered for being the largest and most flamboyant over all the rest. However, no historical document remains as to why he wrote in such a manner. But anecdotes from American folklore suggest that he did it so as to make his defiance against King George III more than obvious to the naked eye and to those perhaps needing spectacles. Friends, one way we invite you into the work of Vote Common Good is by having you sign on with us. When you sign on, when you make a declaration to confronting Christian nationalism and insurrections with faith, hope, and love, we will take you with us throughout the entire Midwest. So when you put your signature, city and state, on our rather larger-than-life bus that is outside, that is indeed what we will do. Because this is what is most important with Hancock's signature. Someone had to go first and pave the way for the others. Someone had to go first and pave the way for the others. So afterwards, when we conclude this event this evening, I invite you to meet me at the back of the room, and we will take you out to the bus where you can sign your name to the bus. In closing, allow me to leave you with these words from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Though the world will little note nor long remember what we say here, may our government of the people, by the people, and for the people never perish from the earth. Thank you.
Well, we're talking about Christian nationalism, which is a heavy topic, but that doesn't mean we can't have a little fun too. So this is an old protest song from the 60s, and if you recognize it, feel free to sing along. There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I've got to beware. Think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Paranoia strikes deep. Sound familiar? Into your life it will creep. It starts when you're always afraid. Step out of line, the man come and take you away. Think it's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Everybody. We are so excited to be in Granville, Ohio today. Thank you for showing up, giving us such a warm welcome. We're going to have a great time together. We are the team from Vote Common Good. You've heard from Nick Brock already. He's from Michigan. That was Dan Dietrich, who's also from Michigan, and Steph Mahan, who's from Nashville, Tennessee, who you're going to hear. You're going to hear from both of them again. So lucky you. We also have on our team, we've got Patrick, who's from Connecticut, and Tim, who's from Oregon. You're going to meet Doug. He's from Minnesota. I'm Rob. I'm from Arkansas. We are from all over, and we are so glad to be here today. I grew up just up the road a little bit, on the east side of Cleveland. Up the road a little bit. I'm still not over the Monday night game. Frankly, yeah. I was there. I got to go. So yeah, we were in Cleveland on Tuesday. So I'm going to the game. So anyways, well, we won't talk about that. So I grew up outside of Cleveland, and I went. My dad was a pastor. I went to Christian schools. It's like I grew up in evangelicalism, and I remember one 4th of July. This is like one memory that just sticks with me for some reason. And I remember our church had a 4th of July celebration, and I remember everybody brought their chairs, their lawn chairs. It was back when they folded and had those weaving things in them instead of the ones that come out of the bag. And we would open them up, and we sat down out on the lawn, and we ate ice cream, and there were hot dogs, and there was patriotic songs and speeches. And everything that was happening on that church lawn that morning was all God and country. And there was no distinction between who we were as Christians and who we were as Americans. There was no nuance between our faith and our patriotism. It all just was stirred up together and served to us as one thing. And I think there's probably a lot of people in America today that's how they think about their, shall we say, dual citizenship. That's how they think about who their identity as an American and as a Christian. There's no daylight between those things. And in a lot of ways that is that can be very benign, right? That can be apple pie and fireworks, and everything's fine and dandy and good. But we've seen in the last few years, seen in the last few months, we've seen in the last few weeks, that idea of an unnuanced and unreflective understanding of our identity as Americans and our identity as people of faith, that when we're not clear on how all of that works together, it can move from being benign to being really quite dangerous. And so what we're going to do today with you is to talk about that danger and to give you the opportunity that I didn't have growing up to think about, okay, what does it mean that I'm an American? What does it mean that I'm a Christian? And we're going to talk to you about Christian nationalism because it has become such a dangerous threat, not just for our country, but frankly also for the church. I would argue that Christian nationalism is bad for America, and it's bad for churches. It's not good for anybody, but, well, it's good for some people. We'll talk about that as we move along. There's basically 4 things we're going to do today. First of all, we're going to help you understand what Christian nationalism is. And I want to be real clear about something. We're not going to present you with a straw man. We're not going to present you with a boogeyman. This is not a political commercial where the candidate that you don't like is in black and white and there's the deep, scary voice about, like, where it's like, this guy is awful. We're not going to do that, right? Now, you might feel like that at times, but what we're going to do is we're going to let people speak in their own words. We're going to let them speak for themselves because we want to be as honest, forthright, and frankly authentic about engaging with Christian nationalism as we possibly can be. And if we just throw up a big straw man here and then knock it down, that doesn't help any of us, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to be very clear about that. We're going to let folks speak for themselves. We're going to engage with that. We're going to think about that. We're also going to help you understand why Christian nationalism is attractive to people. Because not every Christian nationalist is the same. I wish we could say, okay, you get in your mind the picture of a Christian nationalist. You say, okay, this is what it is. I've answered all the questions from here on out. I'm good. The reality is that just like all of us, every Christian nationalist is different, right? And there are different reasons why people approach the world this way. There's different doorways into this room, and not everybody comes through the same door. So it's important as you engage with people to have some understanding of that. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about what churches can do, because we think that it's incumbent upon churches to address this and talk about this. And then we're also going to talk about what individuals can do. Now, I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert. I'm going to tell you the ending of the story right here from the beginning, okay? Listen, I'm going to tell you this, and then, frankly, you can bolt if you want to, because this is where we're going. Where we're going is empathy and engagement. What individuals can do, or I could say it a different way, what you can do is empathy and engagement. If you leave here with like a deeper sense of division, a sense of hatred, distrust, if you leave here feeling like we have demonized Christian nationalists, I think we're going to feel like we didn't do our jobs very well. Because the reality is that Christian nationalists are your family members. They're your neighbors. They're the people on your Facebook feed. They're human beings that we share this world with, that we share this country with, that we share this community with. And as human beings, we're called to love them. So that's where we're going to drive to. So, just telling you right from the outset, you might feel like at times like, oh, these people, I know. We'll have to process that and keep working through it until we get to empathy and love, because that's where we need to end up. So that's the plan. Does it sound good? Make sense? We're excited to be here. This is Doug Padgett from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He's going to talk to you about the threat of Christian nationalism, why it's real and it's worrisome.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, Nick gets to give you some encouragement about the Declaration of Independence in our hearts, and you get to hear a great song, and Rob gets to talk about it, and then I get to bring the dark heart of Christian nationalism. So sorry about that, but we all have our burdens to bear. Okay, we're going to dive in deep. I've been an evangelical pastor for my entire adult life. Never thought we'd have to travel the country and remind people to say no to insurrections and no to Christian nationalism. So, while it's good to be with all of you, I wish we didn't have to be here. Can I get an amen from anyone about that we didn't have to talk about this? We're going to take you through a series of videos, as Rob mentioned, for you to see and hear people talking about Christian nationalism in their own words. Many of them are going to be elected officials, current elected officials. Some of them are going to be people that worked in the previous administration. You're going to hear from experts. You're going to hear from pastors and other faith leaders who are trying to advocate for a way forward for all of us. But our first clip is going to come from a special that was put out by MSNBC about a month and a half ago, and it's about a candidate who won an election in the southern part of Texas, down in the 34th Congressional District. Her name is Mayra Flores. And Mayra Flores is the duly elected congresswoman from the 34th Congressional District. What made it a story is that it was a special election just in June of this year. The person couldn't complete the term, so they did a special election. And the district flipped from being represented by a Democrat to being represented by a Republican. So that caught people's attention. She's a young Latina. That caught people's attention. And she was running on a statedly Christian nationalist agenda started by her pastor with the slogan, "Make America Godly Again." So all of that came together, along with others, as sort of a flashpoint to tell the story of what's going on and why did these voters in that part of Texas move from voting for a Democrat to voting for a Christian nationalist supporting Republican. So that's partly why they put this special together. We'll actually show you 3 clips that came out of this special. They're all short, a couple of minutes long each, but it does sort of frame where we find ourselves, and here's that clip.
Flores is running at a time when Republican candidates around the country have called for religion to play a greater role in government, some of them calling for an end to the separation of church and state, some of them calling for the U.S. to become an explicitly Christian nation.
We need to be the party of nationalism, and I'm a Christian and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists.
The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
We asked Congresswoman Flores for her view of government and religion.
Do you think there should be a separation between church and state?
Well, I believe that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. But I do think that the church does have the right to get involved in the government and letting us know. Because again, I believe that the church knows the people better than the government. And that is a fact. But I agree that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. There has to be a separation.
Train of thought, do you support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country?
Yeah, I do. I believe that we should always put God first.
When you have Christian nationalists in elected office saying statedly, we should be Christian nationalist country, or I'm a Christian who's a nationalist, and we should say proudly that we're Christian nationalists, and having T-shirts, proud Christian nationalists, available on their campaign website, we are in a different space. Our country has long been wrestling with the question of where's the role of religion in our official government. We haven't always done it well, but we've always been wrestling with it. The great state of Pennsylvania, next door, had to move from a religious colony to a part of the Union when we decided that we would not have a religious test or obligation to be a part of this union, that we had the choice as a country, but decided in the First Amendment to say the government shall form no religious creed, no religious expectation, and should not impinge on the right of any religion, that it's going to be open to all and demanded of none. We made that choice, but 246 years ago, not everybody thought that was a good idea. That was hotly contested. And frankly, it's still contested today. The work that's been going on for 2.5 centuries is the work of us today. So these arguments that you're hearing, not just from fringe people, this is not coming just from that person on a Facebook feed. 5 years ago, if you had asked me if we need to go around the country and warn people about the threat of Christian nationalism, I would have said no, and I have a lot of pastor friends that were big into it, and I'm like, I just think we shouldn't give a whole lot of time and energy to worrying about Christian nationalism. They're fringe, it's not going to ever amount to anything, and we shouldn't worry too much about it. Said that to a friend of mine who wrote a book named Greg Boyd, who wrote a book called The Myth of Christian Nationalism, and lots of people left his church over, and I'm like, I didn't have people in our church that were Christian nationalist types, but I'm like, don't worry about that stuff. I couldn't have been more wrong. I was like an early, Christian nationalist denier, like some COVID denier in early January of 2020, right? totally wrong about it. And now there's a new variant of this thing that's alive and well. And it's deadly. What you're about to see in this next clip are people inside the Senate chamber of the United States Capitol on the day of the insurrection. It was filmed by someone with the New Yorker who's a war correspondent and was embedded with the people at the front of the insurrection when they broke into the building. They take over the Senate dais. They're right in the heart of the Capitol, among the first people in. They pray a statedly Christian nationalist prayer in the Senate dais. When people say, and we will say it today, that the insurrection was funded and fueled in its imagination by Christian nationalism, this is why. It wasn't a couple of Christian flags out in the crowd. It wasn't just somebody with a cross. It wasn't just an occasional person with a Jesus is my Savior and Trump is my president shirt. This was the leading edge of the insurrectionists. In fact, you might recognize one of the people in here. He's often referred to as the QAnon shaman. He was the lead inside, the one praying the prayer inside of the Senate chamber. You might recognize him just before he takes off his horns and then takes off his stocking cap underneath it so that his prayer is done in the right way, something that I've watched a number of times in this video and find more than a little ironic. But anyway, here's this. And I'll just tell you, it is difficult to watch and to hear, so I don't know what kind of warning that is, but it is tough to watch.
All the way back to the monument of D.C.
Jesus Christ! We invoke your name! Amen!
Let's all say a prayer in this sacred space.
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for gracing us with this opportunity. Thank you. Let me take it back. Thank you, Heavenly Father.
Amen.
For this opportunity to stand up for our God-given unalienable rights. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving the inspiration needed to these police officers to allow us in this building, to allow us to exercise our rights, to allow us to send a message to all the tyrants, the communists, and the globalists, that this is our nation, not theirs, that we will not allow the American way of the United States of America to go down. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for filling this chamber with your white light of love, with your white light of harmony. Thank you for filling this chamber with patriots that love you and that love Christ. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for blessing each and every one of us here and now. Thank you, divine Creator God, for surrounding and filling us with your divine, omnipresent white light of love and protection, peace and harmony. Thank you for allowing the United States of America to be reborn. Thank you for allowing us to get rid of the communists, the globalists, and the traitors within our government. We love you and we thank you. In Christ's holy name we pray. Amen!
Amen! Christian nationalism is not benign. Christian nationalism has foot soldiers that are willing to do things like the insurrection. We're not trying to be alarmist, just trying to describe what's happening and what people are saying they're willing to do moving forward. So this is part of what we want to do in our work with you today, is help you develop a deeper understanding, as Rob said, of what Christian nationalism is. I operate under this little taxonomy of 1 word, 10 words, and 100 words. Sometimes we only have 1 word description for something, or we can only talk about something with 1 word. So you might be in the group of people that we meet a lot who are like, Christian nationalism? Nope. That's all they want to say about it, right? Like, not Christian nationalism? Good enough for me. Don't need to know more about it, don't want to talk about it, but I'm out. We hope you'll leave here with that 1 word and that positive affirmation today. We also hope you'll leave being able to talk for 10 words about it, or maybe 100 words. Because like a lot of people, they'll say, I am totally opposed to Christian nationalism. Not exactly sure what it is, and if I had to talk for 100 words about it, if I had to write a 100-word essay, I'm not sure how far I would get because I don't know. So we want to offer you the ability to talk for 1 word, 10 words, or 100 words. Because sometimes we need to know the difference of what, how much we should talk about. Maybe with some family or friends, you don't want to use 100 words. You just want to use 1 or 10. You should know the difference. Because, you got to know the difference between 1 word, 10 word, and 100 word answers. Like when someone says to you, but honey, do you love me? The 100-word answer is not the best choice there, right? You don't start with, it's complicated. Let's talk about dopamine levels and, you just go with the yes at that point, right? So sometimes 1 is sufficient, sometimes 10. So what we're hoping to do is to get you inside of this so you understand what's up, what's going on, and what's happening. In lieu of that, we're going to introduce to you this person who was in that same MSNBC special, and he's the one who put the organization together that recruited Representative Flores to run and put a group of churches around the recruitment and the support of this candidacy. And what you'll hear him describe is the work that they're doing is trying to get conservative candidates elected. You're going to hear in a few minutes here from some experts that will say on a couple of occasions, Christian nationalism is not a religion, it's a political ideology that has a particular bent to it to get certain candidates elected to have certain kinds of power in our governments at the federal, state, county, and local levels. You'll hear him, Abraham Enriquez, say that very thing about what they're doing. Then he hits a real crescendo at the end of the clip.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Bienvenido's Faith Assembly team? How do you all organize?
In 2019, we realized that to better engage and mobilize the Latino voters and to expose the message of conservative policy, the best way to do it was through the churches, because 8 out of 10 times, if a Latino is being outreached through the church, more than likely they believe in some of the conservative platforms, so it's much easier for them to get out and vote Republican.
The Congresswoman started and ended her campaign in the church. How effective was that?
The most effective.
Yeah.
Myra Flores were able to bring that message to South Texas and say, listen, no more church lockdowns, no more harassment and attacks on the church. Get out and vote for someone that will protect religious liberty. And that's why over, I think, 75, a coalition of over plus 75 churches came together and said, we are supporting Myra Flores through our congregation, letting them know who is running for office.
Is that a new strategy? I mean, is it a new strategy to sort of deploy churches and pastors?
The Democrat Party has been doing that with black churches for years and years and years. And it took outside organizations like Bienvenido to come in and tell churches, hey, it is your right to be involved. So if Republicans don't start strategizing with Latino pastors and churches like the Democrats have done for years with the black church, there will be no victory for conservative candidates across the country.
God, family, country. Why do you think those three words resonated so much?
It is,
with Latino specifically,
it is the heartbeat of the Latino community. You can't have moral values without having faith, faith in something, faith in having, understanding that God is, your rights come from God and God only, right? So tying those things into
That's a dangerous thing to say, that your rights come from God and God only. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? Well, I would rather say that my rights come from God than rights come from government. Government can take away my rights. I mean, in the Constitution, we have unalienable rights that come from our Creator, being that we have the opportunity of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That only comes from you understanding that there is a moral conscience, right? And for Latinos, that means believing that our rights come from, our God-given rights come from God and not government. And I think that Congresswoman Myra Flores was able to make that a political campaign.
When I talked to the Congresswoman, she even said that she would support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country. Mm-hmm. Those are her words. Mm-hmm. Do you support something like
100%. 100%.
A 100% commitment to Christian nationalism from the person who wants to organize movements among Latino churches. So this is not only happening in white churches. We're going to talk a lot about the combination of the different streams that will come together to make up a cabal of white Christian nationalism in the United States. It's also happening in a number of other spaces. It's happening in charismatic Pentecostal churches, often in the Latino spaces, and in other ethnic groups as well. Now, a couple of things that are important, and it's come up in the two of the videos that we've already seen, is the distinction about what Christian nationalism is and what we're talking about. And look, at the start here, Christian nationalism and being opposed to Christian nationalism is not about people exercising their faith. That's not what we're talking about. Of course people should exercise their faith. It'd be very good if people exercise their faith. No one's trying to stop people from being Christian in the world. No one's trying to shut down churches. No one's trying to make Christianity illegal in America. None of that is happening. That's not what the critique of Christian nationalism is. That's not even what Christian nationalists want. That's not where their concern is. What Christian nationalism is about is the government exercising the government's power to advocate for or derive its authority from or privilege any particular faith. There's a really important distinction that we have to make between a citizen's motivations their faith or economics or their care for the environment, whatever motivates you as a voter, maybe even what motivates a candidate to choose to run, the motivations of candidates or voters or citizens needs to be distinguished from the government's power and authority. My representative is Ilhan Omar in Minneapolis, and she is a great congresswoman. I am proud to support her. She is a Somali Muslim woman. I support her not because we happen to share the same faith, me as a Christian, her as a Muslim. I support her because we both have a commitment to the common good, and that's why I want her to be my representative. Not because she's like me, but when she goes to office, I don't want her relying solely on the Quran, but I also don't want Tina Smith, my senator, relying only on Matthew 25. The role of the scriptures in motivating me or Representative Omar or Senator Smith, any of these people running for office, is different than the rationale they should use for the laws that they make. And a lot of people, this stuff gets confused. It's almost like we should be thinking of it as a side salad where you can have these things that sit next to each other and they can taste fine together when your motivations and then the authority of the government sort of fit together and you like them. Christian nationalism puts all that stuff into a blender and turns it into a smoothie where it's impossible to separate them out. So what's being talked about, both from the advocates of Christian nationalism and the opponents of Christian nationalism, is the role of the government in preferencing one religion over the other. And the default of Christian nationalists is that Christianity is the norm, it was the beginning narrative, and that's the one that needs to lead in America. So that's what's going on. And if you think, well, no one's really making that argument, oh, they're really making that argument. In fact, this is a pull quote from an article in Rolling Stone from a month ago where they did a big article about Christian nationalism. Actually, Rolling Stone magazine has done a number of articles about Christian nationalism. And they articulate this in this particular way. And I have friends who hold to Christian nationalist views, and I'm positive that when they see this description in Rolling Stone about what Christian nationalists think, they will be like, I am so glad that Rolling Stone magazine is telling the truth about Christian nationalism. They will be all for it. They're not going to think this is some sort of a hit piece on Christian nationalism. They're going to be, well, you don't like it, but this is what we're up to. And the way they put it is this. The belief of Christian nationalists is that America is anointed by God to convert the world to Christianity by force if necessary, and they seek to accelerate Jesus' return to rule over the earth by their work, including their divine mission that will be carried out when true believers seize control of the institutions of the United States government. That's what's going on. And by the way, to jump ahead a couple of slides here, this is what people who supported the Trump administration saw in the Trump administration. You may be trying to wrap your brain around, why would these religious people I know be supporting that guy? You listen to him talk, you're just like, this is driving me crazy. You know the phrase in politics that policy is personnel? It's who you appoint to the roles and to the positions. If you don't follow Christian nationalism closely, you might not know the viewpoints of Ben Carson, who was the HUD secretary, or of Betsy DeVos, or of Mike Pompeo, or of Michael Flynn, or of Mike Pence. You might not know who those people are and know that they're statedly Christian nationalist supporting people in the world. But the Trump administration knew who they were, and Christian nationalists knew who they were, so they saw those people in positions of power for the first time in modern history, and they're saying, now we've got something cooking. So they're measuring an entirely different success rate around a Christian nationalist agenda. So that's part of what's going on. Now, I want to be careful here. I am not, I feel like somehow I'm sounding like some, guy on the internet that like, hey, I cracked the code and I got deep into the back end and I figured out what they're really up to. You're going to see throughout the presentation, this is not like secret. They say it out loud. They say it out loud all the time. I mean, you read Charisma Magazine, you watch the Christian Broadcasting Network, they're just talking about it out in the open all the time. There's entire organizations that are promoting that, including this group. This is a group called the Family Research Council, and they ran a seminar back in October. We were doing our seminar on the very night they were running their seminar, very similar. We were in a church, they were in a church. We were live streaming, they were live streaming. You can go back and watch their presentation. They're asking a question, the rise of the term Christian nationalism. Okay, there's a little clue to you. We're saying like the real threat of it, and they're asking the question, where did the term Christian nationalism come from, and why is it being used? And what they're suggesting is, oh, this Christian nationalism business, that's just people trying to talk badly about Christians. They put up this poll in the midst 3 different times in the course of their live and online presentation, and people then voted on the answers to this. And their question is, what is Christian nationalism? And here are your 4 choices. Well, I'm not certain, but it's definitely not what the left says it is. Number 2, it's a creation of the media. Number 3, it's an attempt to intimidate Christians who care for their country. And number 4, it's all of those. So it's either a creation of the left, a creation of the media, or trying to stop Christians from being good Christians, or probably all of them. Might not surprise you to know that 73% of the people picked option number 4. It was all of those. So their statement is, oh, there's nothing to see here. We're going to suggest to you that nearly 56% of people in the United States hold Christian nationalist views, that it's not a fringe movement and it sits at the center of a lot of people's understanding of the country. They said in their presentation, Christian nationalism isn't held by more than 20% of the population. So I guess we'll have a debate about the numbers as we go. But that's one of the big projects that's going on, is this inability to distinguish between a citizen's motivations and the government's authority. This person here in the middle was in the pastor of the church where this event was happening. Their event was under the Pray, Vote, Stand. We're the Faith, Hope, Love people, so you can just see lots of parallels here between the groups. And the pastor in the middle is about to say something that I think really articulates how Christian nationalism is talked about out in the open in a way you might not recognize all the time unless you're listening for it. He's responding to President Biden's use of the phrase, the soul of America, and we have to heal the soul of America. And what he says about that phrase in response to it is this.
It's the right and privilege and duty and responsibility and honor of the Church of Jesus Christ to take care of the soul of America, in the sense that we have the gospel, which is the only good news that heals the soul of America or any country.
So his argument is it's only the Church of Jesus Christ that has the responsibility for it. The government doesn't have that responsibility, the church does. A statedly Christian nationalist way of viewing the world. We Christians, in a certain view of the Church of Jesus Christ, sit at the center of the country, and everything else revolves around our work. The core work of the country is a responsibility of the church. Now look, some pastor or some Christian might think, I feel called by God to do indispensable work in the world. Great. But the rest of the country doesn't revolve around you, and you don't sit at the center of that work. So this inability to distinguish between a citizen's life and faith and what the government does is really the heart of the question. I'm going to show you an example of where that shows up. You might recognize this person. He used to be a lot of things, but including other things. He was the Attorney General of the United States, and that's the role that he's in the clip that you're about to see. His name is Jeff Sessions, and he's going to describe the launch of a new policy by the Trump administration that becomes known as family separation policy. That when people seeking asylum come to the United States and do what the law requires of them, which is to enter into the United States by crossing a border entry and offer themselves to the government asking for asylum. That's the law. When they do that, their children will be taken from them and they will be separated until the processing finishes. As a means of deterrence. An illegal act in the international level and a violation of U.S. law that the Trump administration put into place. It's not only shocking that the Trump administration did this policy and did it so brazenly, but the reason and rationale for it is what Jeff Sessions starts his comments with.
And I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes. Orderly and lawful processes are good in themselves. Consistent, fair application of law is in itself a good and moral thing, and that protects the weak. It protects the lawful. Our policies that can result in short-term separation of families is not unusual or unjustified.
I would differ with the Attorney General at nearly every level of that last sentence. Yes, it is. And yes, lawful processes should be followed. That's what asylum seekers are doing. So I'd love to talk with him longer about that, but we can't get to that because he started the description by citing the Apostle Paul. Thank you, yes, with some added commentary of the facial expressions. This is the kind of thing that if you don't know to watch for it, if you're a Christian nationalist and you hear that, your heart fills with joy. The rationale for our laws is the Apostle Paul. This is what we're talking about in this confusion. No one wants to go around and tell Jeff Sessions why he shouldn't run for president or why he shouldn't have sought to be a senator or why he doesn't want to do good in the world if it's motivated by the Apostle Paul. I'm actually personally a big fan of the Bible as an evangelical pastor, and I have lots of great things I can tell you about the Apostle Paul that he suggests that people should do in the world. Like love one another and consider not your own benefit in all that you do, but consider those others than yourself as just as important. Lots of good things, but not when you're setting United States immigration policy. You don't resort to the Apostle Paul. So what is he doing? Christian nationalism virtue signaling. That's what's going on. It happens over and over and over. Little caveat, by the way. I'm a social activist, one of those social activists that goes out and gets arrested for stuff of social causes and goes out and makes all sorts of kerfluffles in the world. And a lot of people in the Christian world that I do this stuff with love to call our government to use Matthew 25 as their rationale for our laws. Love your neighbor as yourself and can put others before yourself and care for the weak and the poor that are among you. All of that's really good stuff. It shouldn't be the rationale for our laws. Might be the rationale for our motivations for having good laws, but our laws need to root in something not from the Apostle Paul and not even from the Lord Jesus. That's not how we run a country. Here's another example from just across the border.
We have the power of God with us. We have Jesus Christ that we're serving here. He's guiding and directing our steps. And in November, we're going to take our state back. My God will make it so.
So it might be something if Doug Mastriano wants to feel that he's called by God to run for office, but when you have a Patriots Awakening the Dead sign next to you, when you say that I'm going to take this sword and with this sword our government will put the power of God back in our campaign will put the power of God back in our government, you're not just talking about your motivations. You're talking about instilling a different understanding of the government. So this is alive and well all over, from South Texas to Washington, D.C., to Pennsylvania, and everywhere in between. It involves all of us. So let's take you inside of what some of the people who understand this stuff pretty well, how they describe it and how they think about it, all right? But take a little minute, take a deep breath, let all that stuff go for a second. It starts to build up in you. My wife is a yoga instructor, and she's watched a number of our sessions that we've done as we've been on the road because we record all these and we live stream them and stuff. So if you want to share this one tonight or others that we've done with family or friends, you can. She's like, hey, those people need a break at some point. Like you just can't, you just let them breathe. Just tell them they have to just take a deep breath and let it out and let it all back in. So please consider that in your life. Okay. Let's understand a bit of this. We'll introduce you to some experts that we've been in conversation with for the last couple of years about this stuff. Introduce you to someone named Catherine Stewart. She's written this book called The Power Worshippers: Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. She's an expert on this from a number of angles. We did this interview with her. In fact, our organization, after the attacks of January 6, 2021, we launched into a number of online curriculum development that we were doing. So we did a number of interviews, and Catherine Stewart and others you're going to see over the course of the presentation were part of that. Every time you see the screen in this sort of format, that's one of our pieces. I bring that up because we've made all this available online, both in the long form conversations we've had with them, hour and a half long conversations, really getting into this. If you like that sort of podcast level stuff, you can listen to it both on audio or video. But we've also cut it up into short clips like you're going to see in the next over the next few minutes. And we have a downloadable PDF curriculum that goes with it in case you want to have a conversation with a small group or some people around the country, or do something on Zoom with some people to help you sort of process how you would lead a conversation about that. So we have all that stuff available. The card that you have on your chair there, that's what describes that. Those are some of the people involved. So this is the kind of thing that you're going to see in that. We hope to leave you here with some resources. But what Catherine is about to describe is her study as a journalist of what she's learned about the deep back end that funds and organizes and arranges Christian nationalism. There are multiple large organizations, very well-funded organizations, that put forth Christian nationalism stuff, and it's one of her real highlight points is that this is not a grassroots effort. This is a well-funded, top-down model movement that has a particular political ideology behind it.
Let's talk about what Christian nationalism is, and let's talk about what it is not. The first thing to know is it's not Christianity or even a religion at all, properly speaking. It's a political ideology, and its representatives insist that the foundation of legitimate government is bound up with a reactionary understanding of the Christian faith. It basically says that the United States is founded on the Bible, and that our country can only succeed if it stays true to this foundation. It's also a device for mobilizing and often manipulating large segments of the population by getting them to vote for the political candidates that the movement favors, and basically for creating a new elite, concentrating power in the hands of a new leadership cadre of people who subscribe to illiberal ideologies. It's important to know that it's a leadership-driven movement. It's not sort of bottom-up. It's not driven by the rank and file. It's a top-down movement. Or say something else about what the movement is not. It is not just about evangelicals. I mean, it includes some evangelicals, but it excludes many evangelicals, including some white evangelicals and most evangelicals of color. And it also includes representatives of a variety of both Protestant and non-Protestant religion. Ultra-conservative Catholics, in particular, have become a critical element, and the movement actually even has support from individuals and groups that do not identify as Christian at all. And what unites them is not a distinct theology, but a common political vision.
What unites Christian nationalism is a common political vision. I'll just tell you, I appreciate this church hosting this conversation. A lot of churches get really nervous about even talking about Christian nationalism because they know that once you start talking about it, you have to talk about political ideologies. Now, we're not here to tell you who to vote for. I mean, we're not going to tell you don't vote for Republicans. I like to think they're like this self-cleaning oven. They do all the work for you. We don't have to make that argument. You can figure that out for yourselves if you don't want to vote for them, right? Or maybe you do want to vote for them. I don't know. Maybe rethink that. But you can't talk about Christian nationalism without the political ideology that's being used by segments of our society. That's part of what makes it difficult. That's partly why when we're driving down the highway and we have faith, hope, and love, not insurrections on the side of our bus, people cut us off and give us a finger and yell and all this kind of stuff. And other people honk their horns and cheer and say yes, because they know what's up. They can tell that these things are going on and that they're connecting together. I'm going to introduce you now to Amanda Tyler. Amanda is the executive director of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. If you're unfamiliar with the American Baptists, you might hear Baptist Joint Committee and for religious liberty and only think it's a conservative operation. But that's not the American Baptists. In fact, they would say, oh, we've been arguing for the separation of church and state since Thomas Jefferson wrote that letter in 1802 to the Baptists. Are you a Baptist? Wrote it to this churches? Wrote it, American Baptist? Did I just give a talk? Did I just mansplain American Baptists to the American Baptists? God save the Queen. You did? You just joined the UCC? I thought it was UCC. I am so sorry. Hey, if you're not familiar with the American Baptists, you might not know what they're up to. Some really pretty great stuff. That is hilarious. All right, so Amanda Tyler, do you already know Amanda? I mean, she's one of your risings. She's just great. Okay, so she runs this effort in Washington, D.C. She's a lawyer. There's a group of lawyers fighting for religious liberty since 1802, and Thomas Jefferson wrote that letter to the Baptists about separation of church and state. And they've started an effort in 2019 called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. It's a sign-on letter. It's a statement. They approach it like lawyers would approach something. We're going to detail some arguments, we're going to make a sign-on letter, and people are going to have these statements, and they have lots of good information. We approach Christian nationalism like, I don't know, a bunch of song-singing evangelicals that get in buses and travel around the country and try to whoop up craziness anywhere we can go. And we need all those efforts. We're really big fans of the Baptist Joint Committee and Christians Against Christian Nationalism. So before you leave, get on your phone and go to christiansagainstchristiannationalism.org and sign up for their stuff if you're not already there. But anyway, star of the Christians Against Christian Nationalism, American Baptist, Amanda Tyler.
I think that's really a vital point, because we should have a common understanding about what we're talking about as far as Christian nationalism goes. And I'm going to point to the statement that's available at christiansagainstchristiannationalism.org. The work that we did back in 2019 was about providing an advocacy platform for people who were interested in learning more and for taking a public stand. And the centerpiece of the project is a statement. And in the statement itself, we define Christian nationalism as a political ideology that seeks to merge our identities as Americans and Christians. So a few things here. One, we are specifically talking in the American context. This is something that comes up. This is not particular to the United States, but in our work, we are really focusing on the American expression of Christian nationalism. And so we talk explicitly about American and Christian identities. But we also want to distinguish that Christian nationalism is not Christianity. Christian nationalism is a political ideology. Christianity is a religion. That said, you can't totally divorce Christianity out of it. It'd be great just to say, this has nothing to do with Christianity. Yeah. That would be really easy, right? That's not accurate. And that's because Christian nationalism uses the narratives and the symbols, and in some cases, even the theology of Christianity to further this political ideology. But as we define Christian nationalism, it is not itself a religion. It is more about identity than religion in a lot of ways. And we get at this in one of our resources that we have available at Christians Against Christian Nationalism, a really handy one-pager that your guests last week, Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry, helped us put together, called What is Christian Nationalism? And we talk about how it's more identity than religion. When we define Christian nationalism, I think it's also important to say what it's not. It's not patriotism. Patriotism is a love of country, and we can show our love of country in a number of different ways. We can wave an American flag, we can protest in the streets, we can exercise our constitutional rights, right? These are all different ways to be patriotic. Nationalism is a love of country that also requires an allegiance to it above everything else, including our theological views. And so when our theological view, when our patriotism starts to ask us to sacrifice our theological views, that's no longer patriotism, that's nationalism. And particularly as we're talking about here, Christian nationalism.
Really great. I just couldn't commend more of the work that they do and how they're doing it. Third set of experts are Samuel Perry and Andrew Whitehead. They've written a book called Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. Now, Catherine Stewart and Amanda Tyler and Samuel Perry and Andrew Whitehead, they've all been working on this stuff for years. Andrew and Samuel are sociologists that study Christian nationalism in America. They're like the public health and epidemiologist people that when the coronavirus came, they're like, we know coronaviruses, that's actually right in our wheelhouse, right? And the rest of us were like, I didn't even know the common cold was a coronavirus, and right? We're having to learn all that. The experts understood it, knew what was going on. That's these folks. That's Amanda, and that's Catherine, and that's Samuel and Andrew. They know and understand it. They've been working on this stuff for years, so their understandings are really helpful. You might know what sociologists do. I don't know, are you also all sociologists? I don't want to make that American Baptist mistake again. All right, so, okay. Well, what sociologists do is they'll do a number of surveys often. They'll do questions and questionnaires. There's a lot of ways sociologists work, but one of those is to ask questions of large banks of people in the United States. So some of these questions are the ones that they've asked people about Christian nationalism. It'll be specific questions like, is the U.S. Constitution, was it inspired by God and reflects God's vision for the United States? And then how someone answers that question is determined by the bars here. Well, what Andrew and Samuel did is they took that data, huge data put out by Pew, as well as some of their own research, and they assigned point values to each of the questions. Then they aligned people onto a scale that they created where if you had 0 to 5 points, they called you a rejecter. If you had 18 to 24 points, you were an ambassador of Christian nationalism. So this side are people that reject or resist Christian nationalism, and that side are people who support it, based on point values. What they found was that, yes, as we agreed with the Family Research Council, 20% of the American population are ambassadors. These are people pushing for it. 30 to 36% of people are accommodators. Meaning if they said, yeah, the U.S. was a Christian nation at the start and we've drifted a long way from it, we should get back to it. Or, yeah, because we're a Christian nation, if we're going to have a prayer at the football game on Friday nights, it should probably just be a Christian prayer and not any of the other prayers. Or if we're going to have Senate chaplains at the, in our state house or our federal government, they should probably just be Christian pastors. Like that makes more sense than having some other religions, right? That kind of thing. 50 to 56% of the population is somewhere in here, accommodating, thinking it's a positive thing. It's a feature and not a flaw in our system. The reason that's important is because we can't any longer just say it's just a fringe if we ever said it like I did. Shouldn't worry about it. You walk into a shopping mall, you walk down the street in most places, you walk into a family gathering, you could have 50% of the people, if it's just America normal, that if you ask the question about Christian nationalism, they would lean this way and not that way. So it's much more normal than many of us feel very comfortable with. So what we did is talk to Andrew and Samuel about this. They make a couple of really great points. Andrew's going to make a really important point that kind of comes fast, where he says, Christian nationalism operates in the world in a way distinct from all the other social issues. Actually, it's a cause of people's views of social issues. And then Samuel gives this really great, succinct business at the end about where Christian nationalism, how it operates in the world. So here's that bit.
Yeah, well, I'll dive in first and then let Sam finish it off. So in our book, we performed or were able to get data on these large national surveys, and we asked respondents 6 different questions where they could strongly disagree to strongly agree with them. Things like, the United States is part of God's plan, or the federal government should advocate Christian values, or declare the U.S. a Christian nation. And so the degree to which people strongly agreed with those or strongly disagreed, we assigned them point values, and we're able to create a scale by adding all those different questions together. And we did that because it's really important to understand that Christian nationalism isn't a binary, yes or no, but that Americans really are all along a spectrum where some embrace it really strongly. Some, see, Christianity being a part of what we do in the U.S. is important, and others kind of resist that, or the rejectors who we see on the very end of the scale say, there should be no fusion of this type of Christianity, which we define in our book is really this idea of a white conservative natural born citizen. That's the Christian that they're talking about. American civil society shouldn't be fused to this type of Christianity. And so when we're able to create that scale, we can now look at, well, how do these respondents view the world? And there were 3 basic things that we tried to do throughout the book and were our main takeaways. Is the first, that Christian nationalism matters. And so Sam, he'll be able to share, even with his more recent data, that when we're looking at anti-democratic attitudes, or we're looking at policing of African Americans, if we're looking at immigration, if we're looking at refugees, if we're looking at religious minorities, we're looking at all these different important hot button issues, Christian nationalism consistently matters. Over and above whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you are an evangelical or a mainline Protestant or unaffiliated, whether you attend church a lot or you believe the Bible should be read literally, when we account for all those things, Christian nationalism is still consistently one of the most important predictors. So that what that tells us is that this is a key lens through which Americans view their social worlds. Whether they embrace it or reject it, it is doing work in how people are interacting with their world. The second thing we find is that Christian nationalism is not only really important, but it's an actual thing. And I just use kind of this, non-sociological language here, because it isn't just racism, it isn't just conservative politics, it isn't just authoritarianism, but that it is something different. It's its own thing, and so we're studying that. And then our final kind of main finding is that Christian nationalism does not necessarily equal being religious or being evangelical or being a faithful Christian, because we find that those that reject Christian nationalism but maybe attend an evangelical Protestant church, they look completely different from fellow evangelicals who might embrace Christian nationalism really strongly. And so this is something that cuts across religious traditions. So if you're a white Catholic or a white mainline Protestant who embraces Christian nationalism, the likelihood that you really support the insurrectionists is equally high to white evangelicals, what we're finding. And so this is something that really operates across religious traditions. And so those are some of the key kind of points we make in the book. But Sam's been collecting some amazing data lately. And so, yeah, Sam, I'll let you share just a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, just to finish off the discussion of the book, though, I think the way the book progresses is we describe how really Christian nationalism worships at the holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order. It values three things primarily: power, and making sure that our group stays in power and is able to maintain that power. We demonstrate that in the book through its Christian nationalist support of Donald Trump and his policies and his brand of politics. And we've been able to demonstrate that in subsequent studies as well. That Christian nationalism, and especially white Christian nationalism, is very concerned with maintaining proper boundaries between us and them. And that's really one of the things that Christian nationalism boils down to, is marking off who is the us that has the rightful power in the United States and who is the them that we oppose and want to make sure that we marginalize or oppress or drive out. And then the last one is order. Christian nationalism at its core longs to establish and reinforce a very particular traditionalist social order in which everybody recognizes their proper place in the family, in society, in the church. And so it manifests in a variety of ways, but really that's kind of the breakdown of the book, is how Christian nationalism reinforces and worships at that holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order.
It's a real thing. It's the frame and the lens through which a lot of people operate in the world, and it's about power, boundary, and order. You just see, once that becomes a frame that you have to view Christian nationalism, some of what we're going to see as we keep going, and maybe what you've also seen already, you start to see how that shows up. You can see that Jeff Sessions bit just fitting right into that, right? You can just see the Myra Flores. You can see all those pieces. All right. So that's part one. What is Christian nationalism? Okay. Now the next bit we're going to talk about here is, why do people find it attractive? But we give you a little musical interlude in the middle of this, partly because it's content helpful. You're going to hear from our friend Daniel Dietrich here again, but also because it just lets you operate that other part of your brain and also hold out a little bit of hope that people make some changes, that there's some people out there in the voices, and you start to hear 50% or 56%, and it can start to feel like it's a flood overwhelming you. So this Dan, he'll maybe tell you about this, but he wrote this little song about his own experience, and it actually impacted him quite greatly in his life in lots of ways, including it got him in front of you right now. So I don't know if you'll tell that story or not. But.
Yeah, my name is Dan, and I grew up in church, and then I was a worship pastor for about 15 years. And then I wrote this song and got fired. And so I wrote this song. It had been rumbling around in my head and in my heart since the 2016 election, when 81% of white evangelicals voted for a man that looked nothing like Jesus. And I was so confused and hurt. And as Amanda Tyler pointed out, it's not that Christian nationalism is patriotism. Patriotism's great. It's not Christianity. It's not just good people trying to make sure no one goes hungry. It's the pursuit of political power by hijacking Christian symbols and narratives. And that's what this song gets at. It's called Hymn to the 81%. I grew up in your churches, Sunday morning and evening service, knelt in tears at the foot of the rugged cross. It taught me every life is sacred, feed the hungry and clothe the naked, learn from you the highest law is love. And I believed you when you said that I should trust the words in red to guide my steps through a wicked world. And I assumed you'd do the same. So imagine my dismay when I watched you lead the sheep straight to the wolves. You said to love the lost, well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth, well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Oh, they started putting kids in cages, ripping mothers from their babies. And I look to you to speak on their behalf. Oh, but all I heard was silence, or worse, you justified it, singing glory, hallelujah, raise the flag. See your fear, it turned to hatred, but you baptized it with language torn from the pages of the good book. You weaponized religion, and you wonder why I'm leaving to find Jesus on the wrong side of your walls. You said to love the lost, well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth, well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Steph's singing with me from the back. Tell her, get up here. Come on up here, Steph. Come home. Come home. You're better than this. Boy, you taught me better than this. Come home. Come home. You're better than this. I used to think you were better than this. Come home. Come home. Oh. Maybe I was too naive, or I just didn't want to see that there's always been a little poison in the well. Our churches sit on stolen land, a nation built by stolen hands, and we use the Bible to justify it all. Yeah, from slavery and segregation to mass incarceration, this is who we are, but not who we have to be. There's a lot of work to do, pull up the evil by the roots, but repentance has to come before there's peace. You said to love the lost, I'm trying to love you You said to speak the truth. That's why I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. 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 Thank you so much.
And that's a reaction that people give to that song all the time. By the way, his name's Daniel Dietrich, if you want to look it up on YouTube. In fact, that's how we first heard about Dan in 2020, January or so, of when we were out on a tour like this, and people started sending us the YouTube video of that song. You just put up just lyrics of the song, and there were 100,000 views in the first week. People really connected into it, and through a friend, we called, and I was on the phone with Dan. I'm like, hey, we're this group called Vote Common Good. We're out traveling the country. Seemed like we're doing stuff like this. Any chance you'd come to Minneapolis and do that song with us next Friday? He's like, yeah, I just lost my job, so I don't have anything else to do. So be glad. Now he travels around with us. So it's also how Nick got with us. Nick hosted, you saw at the beginning, Nick hosted an event in Michigan, and we like to say, we want you on the bus with us and come with us to the next spot if you want. And Nick's like, really? Is that something we can? So now he travels around with us. So he asked you to sign the bus. We're also asking you to literally get on the bus with us at some point. So if you got something in mind, we'd love to take you with us, especially if you can sing a song like that. All right. Let's shift into trying to have a little understanding for how do people end up believing this kind of stuff, right? So what is it that's attractive about Christian nationalism for people? Why is it possible 50 or 56% of people in the United States hold the Christian nationalist views? They see the stuff that we've seen. They see the destruction that can come out of it and all the rest of it. Why do they hold to it, or why do they defend it? Where does it come from? This is the beginning of that empathy side, right? First some understanding, and now some why do people get there? We're not going to ask you to agree with any of these rationale for supporting Christian nationalism, right? I don't agree with any of this stuff. I want to know what motivates people, though, because human beings are not ideas that have bodies attached to them. People hold ideas, and they can change them. They can let them go. They can swap them out one for another. Part of empathy is understanding why and how it motivates someone. So we're going to suggest to you that there are at least 5 streams that someone could plop their canoe or kayak into that would land them into the deep waters of Christian nationalism. One of those is just an understanding of the founding of the country that goes something like, it was a Christian country at the beginning. We should get back to our roots. It's what made us good to begin with. Why have we lost it? Now, we weren't a Christian nation at the beginning. As I said earlier, we were I don't have to explain this to American Baptists, but for anybody watching online, we were a country that decided not to be a Christian nationalist country. We set those things aside and moved forward into a secular society that was inclusive of everyone. But some people believe differently. You're going to see some videos of people describing the founding of the country as a Christian nationalist country, and most people, frankly, in the United States, believe that. Even people that aren't Christian. They just think, well, you know, it was a Christian country and all, but then it welcomed others, right? This kind of thing. There's also a stream that is basically this wicked confusion between the word church and people. And you can see how it happens. You can see that somebody would go to a congregation and refer to them as, good morning, church. And then pastors will say things like, church isn't an institution. The church isn't a building. The church is the people. And we, the people, elect the government, so the church elects the government. You see how easy that can happen? Well, you're going to watch it in a sermon here in a minute where someone does that just so fluently. This third is seeing the United States as the new Israel. This is a really powerful one. One of my friends, I think, is holds Christian nationalist views. He doesn't always use that term to describe himself. By the way, a lot of Christian nationalists don't use the term to describe themselves. It doesn't mean it's not an accurate reflection, but it's not a self-identifying term. It's sort of like being a Midwesterner, right? I'm from Minnesota, and we're clearly Midwest. You all in Ohio, do you think of yourselves as Midwesterners? Are you iffy? Anybody kind of think you're maybe a little Midwest? When they talk about the Midwest, do you find yourself in that space? You could debate about it. Oh, you can't debate about it in Iowa. You can't debate about it in Minnesota. We're solid, right? But no one wakes up in Minnesota and says like, oh, what a great day to be a Midwesterner, right? But Midwestern is a term you could use if you travel to the East Coast or to another country or somewhere. You could say, oh, I'm from the United States in the Midwest of the country. It's an accurate description, even though it's not a self-identifier. Christian nationalism is like that. So one of my friends is Christian nationalist in his views, and I was checking these content with him because I want to make sure we got it right. I wanted to believe that if he were sitting here and we were describing Christian nationalists, he would nod his head and say, you've got us right. And if we don't have him right, he would correct us, we'd move on. Because we don't need to overstate or understate Christian nationalist views. We should state it exactly as it is. In my view, it's threatening enough as is. We don't have to over or understate it. So I was checking this with him, and and I said, tell me about how you think the founding of the country. And so he pivoted from what I would call number one stream to this new Israel. And he said, well, I believe that only two countries in the United States, and two countries in the history of the world were born of the dream of God. The nation of Israel, born of an idea and dream of God through Abram, and then the United States of America. And those two are unique in the world's history. Sort of like the older, smaller brother and the younger, bigger brother. So that which is then spoken in the Jewish texts to the nation of Israel applies to the United States. So this kind of movement, including this friend of mine, they take on the use of Jewish texts and stories and artifacts. Blowing shafars, wearing prayer shawls, having Shabbat services, all of that. They're sort of Christians who become Jews to fulfill their Christianity. It's a huge movement, especially in the charismatic Pentecostal churches. And you'll see people then who will take a passage from the Jewish text, as we often call it in my tradition, the Old Testament, from that text, and they apply it directly to the United States. There's this really famous passage a lot of them use. It's 2 Chronicles 7:14. Anyone know this one? If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, then I will heal their land. You know that phrase? Well, Pentecostals, Charismatic, and Christian Nationalists do, because they call for days of prayer around that. Because if my people who are called by my name, as the nation of Israel was, so applies to the United States. You'll see this over and over and over, that kind of thing happens. That then leads to the fourth stream, which is the holy war narrative, that we're in a spiritual and political holy war. We're going to introduce you to someone named Mike Flynn, who you may have forgotten about. And then the last is seeing the role of the United States in God's ultimate plan through especially anointed people and leaders. These 5 streams. Okay, so we'll give you a couple of examples of some of these. This is Representative Boebert. She's the congressional representative from Colorado. You heard her earlier. She's the person that said, I'm sick and tired of the separation of church and state garbage. We're going to show you that about a 3-minute version of that sermon instead of just that little clip, because I want you to see how she gets into it and how she gets out of it. And in some ways, this sermon is like the ultimate greatest hits of 3 of the 5 of these that you'll see come together. I want you particularly to notice how she moves from the book of Esther and what the story says that Mordecai says to Esther that moves directly into your county commissioner's offices. So sort of watch for that. The church and people confusion and the claims of the Jewish narrative as the narrative of the people that are there. The context of when she starts talking, people are applauding, and at the end, she turns to the pastor and says, thank you for your boldness. What she's talking about in this whole section of the sermon were the COVID shutdown requirements, that churches were not allowed to be seen as essential operations in the United States during COVID. And a lot of people banked into Christian nationalism because of the COVID shutdowns. Remember way back to that early thing when Abraham Enriquez says, Mayra Flores ran, she said, no more church shutdowns, no more attacks on churches. There's an entire movement in the United States. And if you're wondering why did things seem to get worse, it was because the Christian nationalist movement claimed that COVID shutdown requirements not giving an exception to religious communities was the government attacking churches and Christianity. That's what she's starting with. That's why they're applauding. The church that she's in did not shut down during COVID. The pastor was criminally charged, and then later the charges were dropped. So that's the church that she's in, which is in her district in Colorado. So here's that sermon.
Just because it comes from someone who's elected or a bureaucrat doesn't mean that it's right. This isn't about Republican and Democrat. This is about evil and good, right and wrong. And if you go to Esther 4, in verse 14, Mordecai is talking to Esther, and he says, "For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish." Mordecai is telling Esther, if you remain silent, if you don't show up to your board of county commissioners, if you don't show up to your school boards, if you don't let your elected representatives know what's on your mind, deliverance will come at some point from another place, but not from you. And you will be stuck in that bondage and suffer and perish because of it. The dreams and the gifts and callings that God has on you will remain dormant. If you are silent, you lose by default. That's why I run my mouth often and give God glory. I don't want to lose by default. I don't want to be disqualified. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Now we could take that scripture and make it really cliche. It sounds really pretty and it looks really good on the front of a notebook. But this is powerful because you are called to the kingdom for this time. And you are called to be bold, to go out with power. You are anointed to set at liberty the captives. Esther had that revelation. She said, I won't remain silent. In fact, I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. The reason we had so many overreaching regulations in our nation is because the church complied. The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does. I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. I will open my church and allow my people to assemble, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. I will not mask our children in school, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Thank you for your boldness.
Perhaps like me, you're wondering if she heard Jeff Sessions say that lawful, orderly following of the rules of the government is what makes, it gets confusing. This move, right to your county commissioner's office and to your school board, that's what's going on. This is the Patmos Library in West Michigan, and people with a thing called the Ottawa Impact. It's a Christian nationalist movement trying to take over the county commissioner's office and shut down this library in the vote in August, where they voted on the millage to fund the library. And so the library ran out of money, and then a famous author had to kick in $50,000 to keep the library open for a while, and it'll be back on the ballot on Tuesday. People listen to what Lauren Boebert says, and they act. There's an entire movement afoot in the United States pushing this kind of action and activity. You could sort of see what's going on there. The New Israel, the Christian text, seeing the church and the people, confusion, all of it coming together. So you can understand perhaps how someone listens to sermons like that or goes to places like that, and it seems like it kind of makes sense. We did this presentation in Wisconsin, and the pastor at the church was saying, she just interrupted, and she goes, I'll tell you, that's so hard to watch for a lot of reasons, but I've said a lot of things like that with a different conclusion. She's not a Christian anarchist, apparently, like Representative Boebert is, where the laws don't apply to you. But she did think and talk like that, and she's like, we've got to figure out how to think and talk about these things a little bit differently. So that was Representative Boebert. This man here is the pastor of the church that Mayra Flores went to. He's the one that recruited her to run after they talked at a Trump rally, and then baptized her and then helped her run. You can see the banner, Make America Godly Again. He's wearing that on his shirt. They're going to show you clips of the church service. Lots of people are wearing the Make America Godly Again shirts. In it, you'll also see people blowing a shofar in the church service, the Star of David up on the wall, and the claims of Jewish text, and also the founding of the country, and sort of all of this. And what you're going to hear from him is what a lot of people hear, and frankly, what a lot of people think. So I think it's a really good example of how people, why and how they frame a Christian nationalist understanding.
You know that Thomas Jefferson said that you couldn't even call yourself a Christian, an American, if you weren't a God-fearing Christian. And we're going to proclaim that this nation belongs to you, God. Like it was founded in 1776, Lord. Lord, we pray for the supremacy of God in this nation again.
How involved do you think someone like you should actually be in politics and in guiding policy?
Oh, I think we need to. We like I said, this nation was founded under God, and so we've gone away from that. The church has.
But the nation, in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence, it doesn't give any partiality to Christianity. In fact, the opposite, right? How do you reconcile those two things?
There's freedom of religion, but at the same time, they understood that this whole foundation was built on the Word of God. If we understood, they don't want to force it on you, but they understood, okay, this Constitution will be built. They used 27 scriptures to form the Constitution.
But Thomas Jefferson, who you quoted on stage to your audience, he's very much the one that believed in the separation between church and state. So again,
But you know what? It's funny because that separation of church always comes up. But it was never a law, and that's the thing. Like as a pastor, I just want to to tell pastors it's okay to talk about politics in your church. You won't get in trouble.
Thank you, Jesus.
In Cabrera's view, Mayra Flores is the beginning of something much bigger.
Thank you, Jesus. And devil, we're going to kick you out. Kick you out of our cities, kick you out of our states, and kick you out of this nation, and kick you out of that White House in the name of Jesus.
When you say something like the states belong to Judah or the states belong to Christianity, is that not dangerous?
How am I being a danger to society if I'm preaching what the Bible teaches and all we want to do is
politicians are elected to serve the people, right? To serve everybody, not to serve a God.
Yeah. But hold on, but we are electing them. So they're representing us.
And there's also Muslims that elect them. And
exactly.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. So now as a voice, as a church, we have a right to vote for whoever we want to vote for. So, but if we don't use that voice, then what's the point then? Then we're not doing our jobs as Christians to vote for people that have our values. When you're born again, like your mentality changes. I don't think like a Latino no more. I think like a man of God.
Are there any candidates that Make America Godly Again has endorsed?
Mayra was just the beginning. It was just, she opened a door for other people to walk through.
You yourself were there during her inauguration.
Exactly.
And if I remember correctly, you told Speaker Pelosi that you wanted to take this country back for God.
That's right. And that was, let me tell you, it was, if I died today, it was worth it.
All right, a lot going on there. You can watch that entire special. It's really worth watching. It's worth seeing all that's going on. Her election's coming up on Tuesday like everybody else, so if you want to follow another race somewhere in Texas, maybe keep an eye on the 34th Congressional District down there. All right, so holy war narrative is another stream that people come into this path on, and they understand this pretty well. This is a collage of photos from the Michael Flynn event that he did up in Batavia, New York, outside of Rochester. I went to the event. This is me outside the front, and this is us running an event with Faithful America and Faith in Public Life and Vote Common Good, a counter-protest to the rally that was going on. It's a Christian nationalist effort. They travel the country. It's big in some parts of the country. They've run 30 or 40 of these kinds of outdoor 2-day tent revival actions and activities. They're doing them, even currently now all around the country. And they're run by Michael Flynn and a number of others. Michael Flynn, if you might remember, was the national security advisor, and then the person who admitted to lying to the FBI and was convicted and then was pardoned by the previous president. And now he's a rock star in the world of Christian nationalism, but actually has been since he was the head of JOPS for the U.S. military in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what a special that came out last week from the Associated Press and Frontline on PBS called Michael Flynn's Holy War documents for you, something else worth watching. I mean, honestly, you could spend all week on just Christian nationalism if you want between all this stuff. So turn on your local PBS channel and you'll probably find this Michael Flynn story. And they document how he was using holy war language in Iraq and Afghanistan and now has brought that home. And the same thing, and uses the same idea of him as a general and people as the foot soldiers in this work. So we'll show you a little bit of that, and then later I'll show you some clips of the experience that I had when I was at that event.
General Michael Flynn, ladies and gentlemen.
Michael Flynn's political influence has only grown since the January 6th insurrection.
Tomorrow, we the people are going to be here, and we want you to know that we will not stand for a lie.
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
The fifth.
Flynn has endorsed around 100 candidates for federal, state, and even local offices, raised millions, and helped launch the Reawaken America tour that mixes politics and religion.
I mean, there is a spiritual war and there is a political war. And they are going on. They're going on in this country right now. Since the November Virginia election across the country, we have overturned 200 school boards in this country. 200.
Flynn is getting in front of audiences and he's using Christian nationalist rhetoric to rally people who want to be fed that because they want to be excited, mobilized.
They're going to shut our churches down, and they're going to tell you, you're going to get mandated to do this, you're going to get mandated to do that.
Christian nationalism threatens democracy because it is fundamentally anti-democratic by nature. It doesn't prioritize the incorporation or the participation of all Americans.
They say you're a Christian nationalist. Are you?
What is that? I'm an Irish Catholic.
We should skip that question. He is an Irish Catholic general who served
I'm a follower of Jesus. How's that?
33 years in the military serving his country.
So go ahead and give a watch of that show. The Michael, did it just get darker in here? Are we done? Is somebody shut the lights off? Is that time? I don't know. Yeah, is that what it is? It's just overall depression is now setting in? All right. Well, it's fine with me. Okay, so you can start to see these streams that all start coming together, right, to frame a Christian nationalist narrative. And the final one is the role of the United States in God's plan through anointed leaders. It's often referred to as the 7 mountains theory. The 7 mountains theory you may have never heard of it, but if you're in Christian nationalist circles, you know of it very well. Here's the theory. Think of Moses going up onto Mount Sinai and receiving the commandments of God and being anointed as the leader of the nation of Israel. What the 7 mountains theory says is that God's new work in the world is not going to have just one leader over one nation, but rather every nation is going to have a significant anointed leader in all areas of civil society: arts and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, and religion. So that's the work that they're actually doing, is training up these leaders to give significant leadership. And who do they pick? People that were chosen and anointed by God for the role and the work. If you're familiar with the National Prayer Breakfast that happens in Washington, D.C., it is deeply rooted in this work. It brings leaders from all around the country who have the agenda, who are significant leaders in their country, to have the agenda of God to be leaders in their country, and that's the work that they do. So that's what's going on with that work. And it's all about Christian nationalist efforts and enterprises. So we'll show you a couple of examples of this. This is that Reawaken America tour that they showed in there. I was at that one earlier in the day. Michael Flynn spoke this evening. This video starts, the clip here, or the thumbnail is upside down. It just came that way into my computer for some reason. When we play the video, it turns right side up. But I like to put it that way because it just reminds me how I felt when I walked in. So when I came into this side of the tent, the person on the stage is speaking, and he's talking about King Cyrus, this reference to the Old Testament, and then he has this whole bit about how do we know who we should vote for as president, and it is the person anointed by God or not? So here's that clip.
Cyrus,
Walking into the
doesn't even know the Lord.
Great Awakening.
Because all the Christians, if you ever talk to Christians during an election cycle, here's what they care about. Is he a Christian? Is he a Christian? They want to know if their candidate's a Christian. Is he a Christian? Let me tell you something. One of the worst presidents we ever had was Jimmy Carter, and he was a Christian. The question you should be asking isn't, is he a Christian? You should ask, is he anointed and chosen by God for the job?
Okay, so if you've been shaking your head like, why would they support this person? Because anointed and chosen by God to usher in a certain outcome. Remember that whole bit about certain people taking over power in the political system and the U.S. government? That's what they're saying. Don't ask the old questions. Some of you have been saying, I thought character meant like all the stuff, you're just like, what's going on? This Seven Mountains thing has been functioning all along. They've just changed the categories of how do you know who the anointed one is. This next video is from the Christian Broadcasting Network. You might not know CBN. They did an interview with Mike Pompeo when he was the Secretary of State of the United States of America. He was in Israel, and the reporter asks him, do you believe that Donald Trump might be a Queen Esther character to deliver Israel? Again, and then this is a response of then the sitting Secretary of State of the United States.
There he is. You doing well? Walking firmly through the door, Mike Pompeo is a determined man. Both our Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and I had the opportunity to interview the Secretary of State. It was part politics, part policy, and part spiritual, especially for a strong Christian who experienced a refreshing in the Holy Land.
Could it be that President Trump right now has been sort of raised for such a time as this, just like Queen Esther, to help save the Jewish people from an Iranian menace?
As a Christian, I certainly believe that's possible. It was remarkable. So we were down in the tunnels where we could see 3,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago, if I have the history just right, to see the remarkable history of the faith in this place and the work that our administration has done to make sure that this democracy in the Middle East of this Jewish state remains. I'm confident that the Lord is at work here.
The answer to the question when the Secretary of State, do you think that this president you serve was a Queen Esther story, is he's president because he was elected by the American people. That's why he's the president. We don't have kings and queens. That's not how you end up being in political system here. We use votes. That's how it happens. You might recognize this next person, Pat Robertson. Probably no one worked harder before any of us ever thought about Donald Trump running for office to get him to the presidency than Pat Robertson. He introduced him to the right people, set it up so that when he announced his candidacy, an entire movement of Christian nationalists were supporting Donald Trump all the way through. So the work that goes on when you're doing this, anointed leaders selected for certain positions of power going on. What's going on in this clip is that Pat Robertson is upset with the Trump administration because they are not supporting the Christians in Syria. They pulled troops out of Syria. And then what he says is an indication of how people in this viewpoint think about this. And I think it's a pretty good indicator of how Christian nationalists understand things and how they see God's operation in the world.
However, is now allowing the Christians and the Kurds to be massacred by the Turks. And I believe, and I want to say this with great solemnity, the President of the United States is in danger of losing the mandate of heaven if he permits this to happen.
He's in danger of losing the mandate of heaven. So the idea is there's a mandate of heaven, and that's how someone ends up in the presidency. So just imagine with me for a moment that this is what you believe. Then we have an election, and God's chosen representative with the mandate of heaven is on the ballot, and at the counting of the ballots, he doesn't win. What are the options? wasn't God's chosen, or someone cheated the count. Stop the steal, and all the rest of it is all inseparably tied into this same theory of how we have leaders in this country and what the role and how God's going to operate in the world. So what Christian nationalism does for a lot of people is gives them an understanding of how to engage in the world and how to make sense of the world. It's an important part of this. Okay, we just have a couple of minutes left, but we're not going to let you out of here without a song before we get to the what can we do about it. So this is Steph. She's going to remind us that if we're going to do any of this next bit, right, so this is how people get into Christian nationalism. We're going to talk for just a few minutes after we're done here. We're going to get you out in time for that baseball game, of course. Yes, you should be worried about such things. That we have to think about love. So Steph has this great little song that she wrote. It's just another love song. Actually, it's just another song about love. Just another love song is a whole other song. But it's a real little treat. Thanks, Steph.
How we gonna build a bridge when all we do is build a wall? How can we claim we're not all the same when God made us all? How we gonna raise our babies? Yeah, how we gonna teach them grace? We preach about love on Sundays, yeah, but Mondays it's back to hate. Here's another song about loving each other, just another song about digging down deep. Take a good look at the heart of your brother. We all laugh, we all love, and we all bleed. We all want a better tomorrow, yeah, 'cause everybody's had enough of all of the hurt and the hatred. Yeah, we could show you some love, but getting there it won't be easy. So much work to be done. For better or worse, it's all up to us, but a change has got to come. So here's another song about loving each other, just another song about digging down deep. Take a good look at the heart of your brother. We all laugh, we all love, and we all bleed. But change has got to come. Yeah, so here's another song about love. It's just another song about love.
Because really, at the end of it, what's the point in singing a song, right? If it's not about love. Love is not just a tagline. Love is not owned by any religion. Love is not owned by any group. Love holds all of us. But we also have to work in this next election because some people want to take away the ability for Steph to stay married. And that is something we're not going to allow to happen in this country without people of good conscience and good faith standing up for it, right? We're going to do something about it. So what can churches do? Okay, we spend 90% of our time in this helping you understand Christian nationalism and not telling you what to do. There's a couple of reasons for that. We want you to be thinking about what you can do from your own perspective, because we don't have a problem with Christian nationalism. Problems have solutions. Some things in our world are problems. I have a friend who works in the environmental movement, and he says, if you can't distinguish a problem from a predicament, you're not going to know what to do. because problems have a single response. Predicaments are grand dilemmas that require multiple responses in different circumstances and situations. Climate affects the world differently. Some places now have too much water or not enough. Some places aren't hot enough. Some are too hot. So we're going to have different responses. Responses to Christian nationalism are going to be different everywhere. We stand in a Presbyterian church, we'll have one conversation. Honestly, you stand with American Baptists and somebody who's, married to a person who's the American Baptist lawyer on separation of church and state, sitting over here. You're sitting in a totally different case. So we're not here to tell your church what to do, but we will make a couple of suggestions for you. And one of those is, let's break the no-talk rules. We got to figure out how to talk about this stuff because it's just not working if we're not going to talk about Bruno. And as the great song from the great show, sometimes you just got to talk about Bruno reminds us. You just got to break the no-talk rules and find a way to talk about it. If you want some help in talking about it, here's a great book that can help you do it. Kristen Dumais has a fabulous book on how did things get this way. It's called Jesus and John Wayne. We have a number of interviews on our website. We do long-form and short-form conversations with Kristen Dumais about this and really are worth listening to. So we'd encourage you to do that. We also need to make it about faith and not just politics. But let's make community engagement a discipleship project. Not say politics and community life and civic engagement are somehow outside the church's scope. If you like the Jesus tradition like I do, you might find yourself saying, give to God what is God and to Caesar what is Caesar. Well, let's help people figure that out. That's not easy to do. This big grand experiment we have in this huge complex country of ours with all kinds of people from all kinds of places spanning thousands of miles from edge to edge is really hard. There's a lot to do. We can't kick along anymore just thinking, I don't know, people will just figure out how to be civically engaged. Because I'll tell you what, you pull up a bus that says faith, hope, and love on it to a Democratic rally like we did yesterday, people get really worried. Or a guy in a pickup truck pulls up with a baseball hat on that has an American flag on the front, and people get really worried. There's a whole lot of worry in the air, and we've got to figure out how to deal with these kinds of issues, right? We have to stop the separations and kicking people apart. What can individuals do? Engagement and empathy. You knew that was coming because 2 hours ago someone told you we're going to spoil this thing for you, and it's engagement and empathy. 3 really important questions to ask your friends who are involved in Christian nationalism, either on purpose or by accident. One is, what do they think? Great question. And really listen for the answers. You'll be shocked sometimes at what they say. Secondly, why do you think that? What's the sources? Where does it come from? You'll be shocked, they'll tell you. But the third most important question in my estimation is, what does that belief do for you? How does it help you function in the world? What role does it play in your life? See, we have this bad habit in America that we have a story we're telling each other about what's going on in the world. And our story has 3 characters: a hero, a villain, and victims. We're always seeing ourselves, no matter what side of anything we're on, as either the hero or the victim. Rarely as the villain. Somebody else is always the villain. And when you move in a hero, villain, victim narrative, people will always find themselves as the hero. Somehow being a Christian nationalist either helps somebody see themselves as the as the victim or as the hero. When you're listening, don't assume they're going to tell you why they're the villain. Those guys inside the Senate chamber, we are the heroes. Now they're all doing fundraisers as the victims. Now, the answer to the villain, victim, hero narrative is to recognize that there's a better story. It's the story of the common human sojourn. That we're all human beings finding our way through life together on this planet. We're all just trying to walk each other home at night. We don't need villains and victims and heroes. We have people that are struggling and people that are trying to make it and people that can give some leadership and people that are having a hard time, and we're all moving together. We're not going to get anywhere if we just keep doing 50% plus 1. Look, that's how we're going to do our politics, so turn out on Tuesday and vote, and if you haven't voted yet, encourage it. If you have, tell somebody else to, because you walk in that ballot box and then it's a binary, this or that, this vote or that vote. If you vote for 2 people in the same job, they'll throw your ballot out. It's a world built on binaries of this or that. But when you leave the voting booth, then we're all in this thing together. So deep, empathic listening to people is the only thing that's going to get us there. We all have somebody that we can listen to. My encouragement to us going forward is look, people believe these things for all kinds of really important reasons to them. If you want some help on a couple of books, these two are really great. Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove wrote one called Reconstructing the Gospel, Finding Freedom from Slaveholder Religion. Mind-blowing. He works with Reverend William Barber on all kinds of stuff in the Poor People's Campaign. And he also wrote a book called The Revolution of Values, Reclaiming Public Faith for the Common Good. These are great resources for you to utilize. You can watch that video on our site. But in the end, it is recognizing people hold their beliefs and are held by their beliefs in such a way that it functions in their life in some way that makes sense. The only way we're going to move forward is to counter that. We know that three things are always in place when someone goes through a life change. They get some new information. It's always there, often from documentaries or articles or something. Keep sharing it. If you feel like you're not sharing, that you're oversharing on social media or with family or friends, you're not. Keep it going. I'm going to act like an evangelist here for a minute. Keep going. Keep sharing. Keep spreading the things you know are true. It really is crucial. But it's not enough. The second thing is people need an invitation to act on that information. Someone has to say, do it with me, come with me, you can change, it's possible. Think of anybody that's gone through behavioral change, yourself or somebody else, on any issue, the habits they have or the way that the food programs that they're doing, or they go into, chemical dependency counseling or AA or any of that. New information and an invitation. But then there's a third, which is a community of participation. They need to join a group of other people that are living in the new way. We can't turn our back on Christian nationalists. I sort of wonder sometimes, how long would someone not have to be a Christian nationalist before I'd include them in the stuff that I'm up to? A day? A year? An hour? Less than 1 hour? Maybe a negative hour? Maybe in an hour they'll change? Are they out before they get in? I mean, I'm a progressive, super progressive. Like, we start with inclusion. But do we? Can we? Now, not all of us. Look, we're all going to have there's whole people in my life I will not talk about this stuff with because it just makes me feel like a horrible person. I know I'm no help to them, they're no help to me, and a whole other group of people that I can. We don't know any of you well enough to tell you how to do it, but you know your world well. And include those folks in it if you can. And we'd love to take you with us. We'd love for you to feel like you're part of our work. We do this not just now. We travel all over the country. We do lots of things. We just did a bike ride a year ago. We rode our bikes from San Diego, California to St. Augustine, Florida, along the U.S.-Mexico border, and then all the way to tell the story of who's included in the we and what's our boundary, what's our border policy all about, making a documentary about that. So we do stuff like that. We do walks, we do online material, we do voter stuff, we do all kinds of things. So we really love for you to feel like you're part of it. Get on our email list if you would. If you get on the next couple of days, we'll still send you an email every day. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll stop hitting you up so much after the election is done. But go to Vote Common Good or leave it back there at the little island back there. We've got stuff. And we've got some stuff for you to take with you. If you want to take a sticker or a hat or a shirt or anything, we want you to know that you're part of this thing with us. You see what I'm doing here? A little information, a little invitation, and then a community of participation. You see what's going on here? All right, yeah, don't get fooled. That guy's doing that thing right now. Don't let him trick you. But we'd love to have you in on it. We'd love to have you on the bus, literally go sign that bus. If you want to really be in with us, we'd love you in the tank with us, because there's four things that get us around this country. You already know three of them: faith, hope, and love. You know what the fourth is? Diesel. Yeah, diesel moves that truck. So we like to say, get in the tank with us. If you want to make a contribution to our work, it goes right into the tank and pushes us down the road. We take checks, cash, cards, go on the online. You can do it on there. You can do Bitcoin, whatever it is, however you want to contribute dollars. We'd love to have you do such a thing, if that's what you're into. If not, just know you're part of it. You've been one of the best groups we've been with in this whole little journey. We've only got a couple of days left for doing all this. So but most of all, just know we take you with you in our hearts, and it really means a lot to us. So thanks for being here.